Amid the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, hidden beneath moss and crumbling stone, there once rose a mighty empire where humans dared to dream in stone. This was the Khmer Empire, with its legendary capital Angkor. Once the largest city in the medieval world, where temple towers seemed to pierce the sky and vast man-made reservoirs spread out like inland seas, sustaining millions of people. The Khmer Empire was born in 802 CE, when King Jayavarman II proclaimed himself Chakravartin, universal monarch, and laid the foundations of power in the land we now call Cambodia. From a modest kingdom, they rose to dominate Southeast Asia, controlling not only Cambodia, but extending their influence into Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, and even the Malay Peninsula. Under their rule, Angkor Wat, Angkor Thom, and other timeless monuments of stone were built, astonishing the world for centuries to come. Yet, like Carthage or the Mycenaeans, the Khmer Empire could not escape the cycle of rise and decline. After centuries of brilliance, it weakened under the weight of wars, environmental shifts, and relentless invasions. In 1431, Angkor fell, leaving behind a silent city of stone swallowed by the jungle. But Angkor did not die. It endures in every bas-relief, in every apsara dance, and in the heart of the Cambodian people today. Tonight, let us journey back to legendary Angkor to hear the story of an empire that once blazed with glory, then vanished, yet left behind an immortal legacy. Origins from fragmented kingdoms to the Khmer Empire. To understand the birth of the Khmer Empire, we must travel back to early 9th century Southeast Asia, when the region was not a unified state, but a tapestry of small polities influenced deeply by Hinduism and Buddhism. Before the Khmers emerged, kingdoms like Funan, a flourishing trade hub from the 1st to 6th centuries, and later Chenla, divided into land Chenla and water Chenla, paved the way by absorbing Indian culture, Sanskrit writing, Hindu and Buddhist traditions, and the concept of the Devaraja, the god-king, who was seen as the earthly incarnation of the divine. But Chenla declined, fragmented by internal wars, dynastic rivalries, and external pressures. Out of this turmoil stepped a figure who would change history, Jayavarman II. He was not only a military leader, but also a visionary, determined to unify the fractured Khmer lands into a powerful empire. Around 802 CE, atop the sacred mountain of Phnom Kulen, Jayavarman II performed a grand ritual. There, he declared himself Chakravartin, ruler of the universe, chosen by the gods to govern all earthly realms. This ritual was more than political. It was profoundly religious. From that moment, the king was no longer merely a ruler, but the earthly embodiment of divinity, the Devaraja. This idea bound the loyalty of subjects not just as duty to a monarch, but as devotion to a god. It allowed Jayavarman II and his successors to rule not only with the sword, but also with sacred legitimacy. From this sacred mountain, the dream of a Khmer Empire was born. The early Khmer state Jayavarman II consolidated power and expanded territory. He shifted his capitals multiple times in search of strategic strongholds, from Hariharalaya in the Roluos area to settlements near the Tonle Sap Lake. Gradually, he laid the groundwork for a dynasty capable of resisting external threats and unifying the fractured Khmer lands. The Khmers borrowed heavily from Indian civilization, writing systems, law, religion, and architecture. Yet they did not merely copy. They forged a unique identity, blending Hindu deities like Shiva and Vishnu with indigenous mountain and river gods of Southeast Asia. Geography played a crucial role. Tonle Sap, the largest freshwater lake in Southeast Asia, became the empire's lifeline. During the rainy season, the river reversed its flow, flooding the lake and creating vast fertile plains. In the dry season, the waters receded, leaving behind nutrient-rich soil for rice cultivation. This agricultural abundance allowed the Khmer to feed millions and support the construction of their colossal monuments. By the mid-9th century, the first temples arose. At Hariharalaya, early brick and sandstone towers dedicated to Hindu deities marked the beginning of a centuries-long tradition of monumental building. The Khmer kings were not just rulers or warriors, they were builders. Each sought to leave behind temples and monuments as eternal symbols of their divine authority. The foundation of power. From its inception, the empire rested on three pillars: divine kingship, wet rice agriculture, and monumental construction. Together, these elements forged a rising power capable of challenging neighbors like Champa to the east and Srivijaya to the south. Thus, from the sacred proclamation on Phnom Kulen, from the fertile rice fields of the Tonle Sap Basin, and from the first red brick shrines glinting in the Southeast Asian sun, the Khmer Empire was born. A dream in stone had begun, one that would grow into one of the greatest empires in the history of Southeast Asia. If Jayavarman II was the one who laid the first stone for the foundations of the Khmer Empire, then the centuries that followed were the age in which this empire rose to its pinnacle, becoming one of the most powerful and dazzling civilizations of Asia. In the heart of the Indo-Chinese jungle, Angkor rose like a colossal city with vast artificial reservoirs, intricate canals, and stone towers that seemed to touch the clouds. This was the Golden Age, a time when nature, engineering, religion, and power fused to create a civilization that astonished the entire world. The strength of Angkor lay not only in war or territory, but in wet rice agriculture and its vast hydraulic system. The Khmers mastered the use of the Tonle Sap, the heart of the kingdom, to create a colossal rice-producing machine. They dug canals stretching for dozens of kilometers and built enormous man-made reservoirs called baray to control water. The West Baray, nearly 8 km, and the even larger East Baray looked like inland seas carved into the jungle. Thanks to this mastery of water, the Khmers could grow rice year-round, producing far beyond domestic needs. This agricultural abundance fed millions and became the engine of prosperity, enabling the empire to sustain armies, construct monumental works, and expand its influence. Upon this foundation, Angkor began to build monuments that would leave humanity in awe. In the 12th century, under King Suryavarman II, Angkor Wat was erected, the largest Hindu temple in the world, dedicated to Vishnu. More than a religious shrine, it was a declaration of power, a proclamation that the king was the earthly embodiment of the divine. Its central towers symbolized Mount Meru, the cosmic axis in Hindu belief, encircled by moats and walls representing the oceans and the universe. At sunrise, light poured through long galleries, glimmering across finely carved bas-reliefs, creating a vision of sacred wonder. Angkor Wat was both temple and mausoleum, and remains one of the greatest achievements of human architecture. After Suryavarman II came Jayavarman VII, under whom the Khmer Empire reached its zenith. He was not only a warrior king, but also a master builder. Jayavarman VII expanded Khmer territory to its widest extent, encompassing Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, parts of Myanmar, and southern Vietnam. He defeated Champa, the old nemesis, reducing it to vassalage, then turned inward to create a new capital, Angkor Thom. Enclosed by 12 kilometers of walls and vast moats, Angkor Thom housed the legendary Bayon temple with its hundreds of enigmatic stone faces smiling serenely from the towers. Those smiles remain some of the most haunting and captivating images of Khmer civilization. At its height, Angkor was more than temples. It was a vast urban complex. Administrative buildings, markets, and residential quarters stretched across tens of square kilometers, making Angkor the largest city in the medieval world, with a population possibly reaching hundreds of thousands. Roads connected Angkor to distant provinces, bridges spanned rivers, and colossal statues of gods lined the gateways. The effect was both monumental and refined. Khmer art reached new heights as well. The bas-reliefs of Angkor Wat depict epic Hindu tales like the Mahabharata and Ramayana, while also showing daily life: soldiers marching, farmers harvesting, merchants trading. These carvings glorified gods and kings, but also preserved the rhythms of society. Alongside them, the celestial dancers, the apsaras, were immortalized in stone with fluid grace. Even today, the apsara dance remains a living symbol of Cambodia, proof of the enduring vitality of Khmer culture. Religiously, this golden age was marked by a remarkable fusion of faiths. Hinduism initially dominated, with temples dedicated to Shiva and Vishnu, modeled after Mount Meru. But under Jayavarman II, Mahayana Buddhism became the state religion. Temples such as Bayon, Taprom, and Preah Khan were built with Buddhist ideals, featuring countless images of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. Yet Hinduism was never erased. Instead, the two coexisted, with temples often housing both Hindu deities and Buddhist statues. This duality reflects the flexibility and inclusiveness of Khmer civilization, its power to integrate multiple traditions. Beyond religion and architecture, Angkor was a political and military power dominating Southeast Asia. The Khmer kings maintained formidable armies with war elephants, cavalry, and infantry, capable of both expanding and defending their vast domains. Khmer war elephants, armored and trained for battle, were terrifying weapons against foes like Champa or Siam. Chinese and Indian chronicles alike described the Khmers as a mighty empire controlling overland trade routes and parts of the maritime passages linking the Indian Ocean with East Asia. All these elements, rice agriculture, massive irrigation, monumental temples, exquisite art, and military might, made the Khmer Empire a true superpower. For centuries, Angkor was not just the capital of a kingdom, but the embodiment of divine order, where gods and humans converged. Kings were revered as incarnations of the divine, temples stood as cosmic centers, and society moved under the conviction that they lived at the very heart of the world. This golden age, spanning from the 9th to the 13th centuries, left behind monuments and legacies that still astonish humanity today. Yet even amid its brilliance, seeds of decline were sown. For such massive temples, intricate hydraulic systems and vast armies required immense resources. When resources dwindled, when nature turned hostile, when external enemies arose, even this brightest star of Southeast Asia would face challenges it could not escape. But in that moment, under the blazing sun of Indochina, Angkor stood tall, proof that humanity could bend nature and carve eternal dreams into stone. If the colossal monuments of Angkor were the face of the Khmer Empire, then its society, religion, and daily life were the soul within. After all, no civilization could have built wonders like Angkor Wat or Bayon without a strong social structure, deep religious faith, and a tightly woven communal life. When we look at the bas-reliefs, we do not only see Vishnu, Shiva, or the Buddha, but also farmers harvesting rice, soldiers marching, and bustling markets. This harmony is what made the Khmer Empire one of the most unique societies in history. At the top of the social hierarchy stood the king, the Devaraja, the God King. He was not only the political ruler, but the earthly embodiment of the divine, the bridge between the human world and the cosmos. His authority was sacred, unquestionable. Supporting him was the nobility and officials, often from powerful families, who governed provinces, collected taxes, commanded armies, and oversaw hydraulic works. They were both the king's pillars and his instruments of power. Below them were the clergy and scholars, essential in maintaining religious faith and education. Temples were not just shrines, but also centers of learning, preserving Hindu and Buddhist scriptures. Many Khmer inscriptions were written in Sanskrit, showing how deeply Indian culture was absorbed, while at the same time the Khmers developed their own script for daily use. This intellectual class helped sustain both the sacred and practical knowledge of the empire. The majority of Khmers were farmers. They lived along the fields of the Tonle Sap, growing rice and raising livestock. These farmers were the backbone of the economy, producing the rice that fed soldiers, nobles, artisans, and temple builders. Without their toil in the mud, Angkor Wat would never have risen under the sun. Farmers also provided the massive labor force mobilized for canals and temples. Every stone of Angkor bears the sweat of countless commoners. Next came the craftsmen, sculptors, builders, and carvers. They turned sandstone into storytelling walls, clay into sacred statues, and human skill into immortality. The sweeping bas-reliefs of the Mahabharata, or Ramayana, are not only mythology, but testimony to Khmer artistry. Their mastery in carving sandstone created forms so fluid they seem alive. Society also included slaves and war captives, often seized in campaigns against Champa or other neighbors. They labored in construction or served nobles. Though records are scarce, they were clearly part of the Khmer machine. Religion in the Khmer Empire was a story of transformation. At first, Hinduism dominated, with temples like Preah Ko and Bakong devoted to Shiva or Vishnu. Kings linked themselves to gods, Jayavarman II with Vishnu, for instance, not only out of devotion, but to legitimize authority. If the king was the god's earthly form, his power was divine and absolute. From the 12th century, Mahayana Buddhism rose in prominence. Under Jayavarman II, it became the state religion. Temples like Bayon, Ta Prohm, and Preah Khan were filled with images of Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion. Buddhist ideals of mercy and salvation shaped governance. Jayavarman VII was famed for building hospitals and rest houses across the empire. This marked a profound shift, showing Khmer adaptability. By the 13th–14th centuries, Theravada Buddhism from Sri Lanka spread and gradually replaced Mahayana Buddhism. This final transformation shaped Cambodia's spiritual identity to this day. The coexistence of Hinduism, Mahayana, and Theravada created a religiously diverse spiritual life. Daily life reflected the empire's prosperity and complexity. Farmers worked the cycles of the monsoon, celebrated harvest festivals. Merchants traded rice, fish, salt, spices, and cloth. Angkor's markets brimmed with goods from across the region, proof of its role as a trading hub. Soldiers trained and war elephants were kept ready for battle. Artists danced the sacred apsara. Priests performed rites in temples. Each segment of society, from king to peasant, played its role in the great engine of Angkor. Khmer culture was equally symbolic. Apsara dance was not mere entertainment, but a ritual where dancers embodied celestial beings. Khmer architecture, with tiered towers symbolizing sacred mountains, expressed mankind's yearning to unite with the cosmos. Music, sculpture, garments, all saturated with symbolism, connecting daily life with the divine. Looking at Khmer society, we see the synergy of absolute monarchy, deep faith, peasant labor, and artisan brilliance. Together, they sustained a mighty empire for over 6 centuries, yet this reliance on religion and vast labor projects also planted seeds of crisis. If faith faltered or the waterworks failed, the system could unravel. But at its height, Khmer society shone like a jewel in the Indo-Chinese jungle. The stone towers still pierced the sky, Bayon's faces still smiled, the Tonle sap fields still ripened with rice, and millions lived in step with the pulse of the most powerful empire Southeast Asia had ever known. No dynasty can remain forever at its peak, and Angkor, the heart of the Khmer Empire, was no exception to the unforgiving cycle of rise and decline. After centuries of glory, by the 13th century, the first cracks began to appear in the great machine that had once sustained millions. The Khmer Empire entered a dark age where internal weaknesses and external pressures fused into a storm that dragged Angkor from its golden heights into the abyss of collapse. First came the endless wars that drained Khmer strength. For centuries, they had clashed with Champa to the east, a tenacious rival that refused to yield. Jayavarman II had once defeated Champa and even captured its capital Vijaya, but Champa revived and retaliated, repeatedly harassing Khmer borders. To the north and west, a new threat arose: the Thais. Throughout the 13th century, Thai groups migrated down from the highlands, founding kingdoms such as Sukhothai and later Ayutthaya. These young, vigorous states rapidly grew in power, challenging Khmer dominance. From being the master of Southeast Asia, the Khmer now had to share power with ambitious rivals. At the same time, within Angkor, religious transformation shook the empire's spiritual unity. From Hinduism to Mahayana Buddhism, and finally to Theravada Buddhism, the shifting of faith undermined the Devaraja concept, the God King. Once the king was no longer viewed as the untouchable embodiment of divinity, political authority weakened. Nobles began asserting their own power, while the people lost faith in the sacredness of the throne. For an empire sustained by divine legitimacy, the erosion of belief meant the foundations themselves began to crumble. But perhaps the fatal blow came not from enemies or faith, but from nature itself, the very force that had nurtured Angkor for centuries. Khmer might rested entirely on the vast hydraulic network surrounding the Tonle Sap. The great barrays, canals, and reservoirs had turned this land into a rice-producing engine that fed the empire. Yet such a complex system required constant maintenance and careful management. When wars, unrest, and political turmoil disrupted upkeep, canals silted up, reservoirs lost their efficiency. Modern studies show that in the late 14th and early 15th centuries, the region was struck by alternating severe droughts and floods. When the rains no longer came in their season, when water no longer followed its rhythm, Khmer rice fields withered, agriculture collapsed, famine spread, and people abandoned Angkor. A civilization built on controlling water was ultimately betrayed by water itself. Wars with Champa, Jai Viet, and Siam further worsened the decline. In 1283, Mongol forces swept into Southeast Asia, and the Khmer were forced to submit, paying tribute to avoid destruction. It was a clear sign that the empire could no longer defend itself. By the 14th century, Ayutthaya, the rising Thai kingdom, grew ever stronger, launching raids deep into Khmer territory. Finally, in 1431, after years of conflict, the Siamese army besieged and captured Angkor. The legendary capital fell. Towers that once soared to the sky were engulfed in smoke and fire. The immortal smiles carved on Bayon's faces were silenced beneath the boots of conquerors. The Khmer did not vanish completely after this catastrophe. They retreated south, founding a new capital at Phnom Penh, and survived as a smaller kingdom. But Angkor's radiance was gone forever. Its monumental temples were abandoned, swallowed by jungle. Giant roots strangled stone walls, moss spread across reliefs. And Angkor became a ghost city, ruled only by nature and silence. For centuries it faded from human memory, surviving only in Khmer legends. The fall of Angkor was a tragic epic in which both mankind and nature played their parts. It revealed the fragility of even the mightiest civilizations. When faith fractures, when nature turns hostile, when external enemies strike, even the largest medieval city on Earth can collapse. Angkor was once where humans dared to dream in stone, but even stone could not resist the merciless wheel of history. Today, when we walk beneath the giant trees of Ta Prohm or gaze at the crumbling walls of Angkor Thom, we see not only the ruins of a kingdom, but also a timeless reminder. No power is eternal, no empire everlasting. Angkor once blazed like the sun, and then dimmed like dusk. Yet its very collapse has made it immortal in human memory. Angkor fell in 1431 under the boots of the Siamese army, but that was not the end of the Khmer. In fact, from that very moment, Angkor began a new journey, the journey of memory, of legacy, of immortality in the human mind. For what the Khmer left behind could not be destroyed by the fires of war, could not be swallowed by the jungle, and could not be erased by time. They live forever in stone, in dance, in faith, and in the very soul of Cambodia today. The most visible and enduring legacy is, of course, the immortal stone monuments. Angkor Wat, Angkor Thom, Bayon, Ta Prohm, Preah Khan, Banteay Shray. Together they form a vast architectural complex where every brick and every block of stone testifies to the genius, the faith, and the determination of the Khmer people. Angkor Wat, with its soaring towers and intricate bas-reliefs, is not just a temple, but a symbol. Today it stands proudly on the Cambodian flag, a reminder that the Khmer spirit remains bound to Angkor, even though the dynasty has vanished and the empire has fallen. Beyond architecture, the Khmer left behind a spiritual and artistic heritage of immense richness. The Apsara dance, once carved on the stone walls of Angkor, still exists today, becoming a cultural essence of Cambodia. In each graceful movement, each glance, each smile, one can glimpse the shadows of celestial dancers who once performed in the palaces of Angkor 1,000 years ago. Khmer music, costume, and sculpture also endure, not only in museums but in daily life. Another vital legacy is the blending of religions. The Khmer embraced Hinduism, then Mahayana Buddhism, and finally Theravada Buddhism. Thanks to this, modern Cambodia remains deeply Buddhist, yet its architecture and traditions still retain echoes of Hinduism. This synthesis forged a Khmer identity that was never closed off, but open, receptive, and adaptive for survival. Angkor also left humanity with a profound lesson about the relationship between people and nature. The vast irrigation system that once fed millions collapsed when nature shifted and balance was lost. This serves as a stark reminder that no civilization, however mighty, can detach itself from natural laws. Modern studies of Angkor have become invaluable references for us today in the era of climate change and environmental crisis. Historically, Angkor stands as proof of humankind's extraordinary creativity. At its peak, Angkor was the largest city in the world, greater than London or Paris of the Middle Ages. The immense barays like inland seas, the canals stretching like rivers, the soaring stone temples in the jungle, all were created by human hands without modern machines, without steel, without concrete. Only with willpower, belief, and perseverance. This makes Angkor one of humanity's greatest wonders, standing alongside the Egyptian pyramids and ancient Babylon. And though Angkor was forgotten for centuries, swallowed by the jungle, it was rediscovered. In the 19th century, Western explorers stumbled upon Cambodia and were astonished to find a colossal stone city hidden under trees. From then on, Angkor became a legend, a source of inspiration for endless research, literature, and art. Today, Angkor is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a destination for millions of visitors every year, and a symbol of Cambodian pride on the global stage. But the greatest legacy of Angkor does not lie in stone walls. It lies in spirit. The Khmer, despite enduring countless tragedies, from Angkor's fall to modern catastrophes, always draw strength from this heritage. Angkor Wat, on the national flag, is not just an emblem, but a reminder. The Khmer were once great, they once built a wonder, and they can rise again. In every beat of modern Cambodian life, Angkor still lives. In dances, in festivals, in faith, and in the conviction that history is never lost, only transformed into spiritual power for the present. Angkor, an empire that once shone brightly and then collapsed, ultimately achieved immortality in its own way. It is no longer a political empire, but an empire of memory. It no longer rules with sword and spear, but still reigns with beauty and mystery. It no longer exists in power, but lives on in stone, in dance, in prayers, and in the eyes of today's Khmer people. And that is its greatest legacy, a civilization that disappeared politically, but still lives forever in human memory, a testament that beauty, the sacred, and the aspiration toward immortality are forces stronger than time itself. Angkor fell, but Angkor never died. Angkor was once the very center of a world where stone towers rose skyward, where vast artificial reservoirs sustained millions of lives, and where kings were revered as living gods. But like all empires, that light gradually faded, leaving the jungle to swallow its temples and the silent stone smiles to linger in stillness. The fall of the Khmer Empire was one of history's great tragedies, yet from its ashes, an immortal legacy was born. Today, when we walk through the endless corridors of Angkor Wat, gaze upon the serene faces of Bayon, or touch the roots that tighten their grip on the stone walls of Thom, we do not merely see the ruins of a lost kingdom, we feel the soul of a people. The Khmer may have fallen, but Angkor still stands, a reminder that while all power must eventually pass, beauty and faith can endure forever. Angkor does not belong to Cambodia alone, it belongs to humanity. It is proof of mankind's eternal yearning for immortality, a whisper that deep within the jungle, a civilization once blazed with glory, and that light has never truly gone out. In every stone, every apsara dance, every carved detail, Angkor still lives, not as a city, but as an immortal legend in the memory of humankind.